There are nights people remember because something extraordinary happened. And then there are nights people remember because they realized they had been laughing at the wrong man. The night I'm about to tell you about started with arrogance. It ended with fear. Not the kind of fear that comes from pain, the kind that comes from watching everything you believe collapse right in front of your eyes. My name is Daniel Carter. In 1972, I was 29 years old and working as a sports photographer in Los Angeles. I had spent years around fighters, real fighters, men who broke noses for a living, men who walked into rings knowing somebody might not walk back out. I thought I understood intimidation. I thought I understood confidence. Then I witnessed something that changed the way I looked at martial arts forever. Back then, Los Angeles was obsessed with toughness. Every neighborhood had a dojo. Every block had a boxing gym. Every weekend, another tournament appeared somewhere in the city. The streets were full of young men desperate to prove they were stronger than everyone else. Strength was currency. Reputation was everything. And inside the martial arts world, karate ruled California. Karate schools multiplied faster than anyone could count. Champions became local celebrities. Tournament winners signed autographs. Students wore black belts with the pride of military veterans. The problem was that success slowly transformed confidence into arrogance, then arrogance into contempt, and eventually, contempt into cruelty. The favorite target was always the same: the Chinese kung fu schools hidden throughout Chinatown, old training halls, family academies, dust-covered warehouses where masters taught traditions passed down for generations. To the karate community, none of that mattered. They mocked it all. They called kung fu outdated. They called it ineffective. But one word appeared more than any other: dancing. That word spread like poison. Every tournament, every exhibition, every demonstration. The same laughter, the same mockery, the same disrespect. I saw it happen again and again. One afternoon, I photographed a martial arts showcase downtown. A group of kung fu students performed first. Their movements were beautiful, precise, disciplined. Years of training visible in every motion. The moment they finished, a karate champion walked onto the stage and began mocking them. He copied their movements, exaggerated their stances. The crowd erupted with laughter. People pointed. People shouted. People turned centuries of tradition into a joke. The kung fu students stood there silently, embarrassed, humiliated. And somehow their silence made the scene even harder to watch. Weeks later, I witnessed something worse. A famous karate instructor stood outside his dojo near Sunset Boulevard, surrounded by students. Across the street, two elderly Chinese masters walked quietly together. The instructor noticed them, smirked, then spat onto the pavement. "This isn't fighting," he shouted. "It's ballet." His students exploded with laughter. One of the older masters lowered his head slightly. Neither man responded. Neither man defended himself. They simply continued walking. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't, because somebody else was watching. A man standing beneath the red glow of a restaurant sign, silent, motionless, hands inside his jacket pockets. At first glance, he looked ordinary, not especially large, not especially intimidating. Certainly not somebody who would draw attention. Yet there was something unsettling about him. Everyone else looked entertained. He looked disappointed. Not angry, not offended. Disappointed. Like a man watching people desecrate something sacred. For several seconds he remained perfectly still, watching, studying, thinking. Then he turned and disappeared into the night. That man was Chuck Norris. Most Americans barely knew his name then. Inside martial arts circles, however, people spoke about him differently. Quietly, carefully, almost cautiously. Stories followed him everywhere. Some claimed he trained harder than anyone alive. Others said he sparred with a level of control that felt impossible. A few insisted he could read an opponent before the opponent even moved. The stories sounded ridiculous, until you noticed something strange. The people telling them weren't exaggerating. They were remembering. One former fighter told me something I never forgot. He stared at the floor for several seconds before speaking. Then he said, "Chuck Norris doesn't make you feel slower." He looked up. "He makes you feel like you're standing still." I laughed when I heard it. Years later, I stopped laughing, because the strangest stories were always the ones that turned out to be true. 3 weeks later, Los Angeles exploded with anticipation. Posters appeared everywhere: store windows, telephone poles, bus stations, newspapers. One sentence dominated every advertisement: "Karate will prove its superiority once and for all." The line beneath it was even worse: "Kung Fu practitioners welcome." Everybody knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't an invitation. It was an execution notice. Radio hosts joked about it. Sports writers fueled it. Entire audiences laughed at the idea of Kung Fu competing against California's best karate fighters. The city became obsessed. Tickets disappeared within 48 hours. 5,000 seats sold out. People weren't buying tickets for competition. They were buying tickets for humiliation. The night finally arrived. Downtown Los Angeles looked electric. Neon lights painted the streets red and blue. Traffic stretched for blocks. Vendors lined the sidewalks. Crowds flooded toward the arena from every direction. The atmosphere felt less like a sporting event and more like a public spectacle. Inside, the energy was overwhelming. Thousands of people packed the building. Cigarette smoke drifted beneath the lights. Beer splashed across concrete floors. The roar of conversation echoed from wall to wall. Everybody expected the same outcome: karate victory. Nothing else. I entered through the media entrance carrying my cameras. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. The karate section looked exactly as expected: confident, loud, celebrating before the first match even began. But the Kung Fu section felt different. Very different. Around 20 Chinese masters sat together near the upper rows. Nobody smiled. Nobody laughed. Nobody even spoke. The atmosphere around them felt heavy, almost mournful, like men attending a funeral they couldn't prevent. Then another figure drew everyone's attention: Rick Morrison, the most feared fighter in the tournament. 6'4", 230 pounds, former kickboxing champion. Broad shoulders, massive hands, a reputation built on destruction. People called him the Wall because opponents hit him and broke. Standing near the ring, he looked less like an athlete and more like a weapon. The crowd adored him. Rick looked toward the Kung Fu section, then smiled. The kind of smile predators wear before feeding. He raised his voice. "Hope your dancers stretched before tonight." The arena exploded.
Laughter crashed through the building. Students doubled over. Spectators pointed toward the Chinese masters. The humiliation had become entertainment. I raised my camera. Flash, flash, flash. The masters never reacted. Not one. No anger, no response. Only silence. Then something caught my eye. An empty seat. One chair among them, near the edge of their section, reserved for someone important. Someone who still hadn't arrived. I don't know why I kept staring at it, but I couldn't look away. Because deep down, something felt wrong. Very wrong. The announcer stepped into the ring moments later. The crowd erupted. The first fight was about to begin.
The humiliation everyone had paid to witness was finally starting. And somewhere outside that arena, a man named Chuck Norris was walking toward the building. Nobody noticed him. Nobody recognized what was coming. Nobody understood that before the night ended, the laughter filling that arena would disappear completely. And when it did, it would never return. The first fight lasted 19 seconds. 19. That was all it took for the arena to erupt. The kung fu fighter barely had time to establish his stance before Steve Maddox exploded forward like a charging bull. The impact echoed through the building. A sharp collision, a gasp, then silence. For a fraction of a second, the kung fu fighter crashed onto the canvas. The referee stepped in. The fight was over. 19 seconds. The audience exploded. Beer splashed into the air. People jumped from their seats. Some laughed so hard they nearly collapsed. Others pointed toward the kung fu section. "Dance now!" The insult cut through the arena like a knife. I instinctively turned my camera toward the Chinese masters. Flash, flash, flash. Nothing. Not a single reaction. Their faces remained motionless, but their eyes told a different story. Humiliation, pain, disappointment. Not because their fighter had lost, because thousands of strangers were celebrating their humiliation. And deep down, they knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The second fight began minutes later. This one lasted longer, but somehow felt worse. The kung fu representative moved beautifully. His footwork was sharp. His timing looked perfect. For several moments, he actually controlled the distance. The crowd grew quieter, uneasy. Then everything changed. One mistake, one opening, one devastating kick. The karate fighter's roundhouse landed like a hammer. The sound echoed through the arena. The kung fu practitioner collapsed instantly, unconscious. The audience erupted again. This time the laughter felt crueler, meaner, like blood in the water. People weren't watching competition anymore. They were watching destruction, and they were enjoying it. By the third match, something ugly had happened inside the building. The crowd had transformed. The alcohol, the rivalry, the excitement, everything mixed together into something dangerous. Every time the kung fu fighter entered a traditional stance, people laughed. Every time he adjusted his footing, they mocked him. Every movement became a joke. A man behind me shouted loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "My grandmother fights harder." The people around him exploded with laughter. Even some reporters were smiling. I lowered my camera. For the first time all night, I felt uncomfortable being there. The third kung fu fighter lost badly. Not because he lacked skill, because confidence had already disappeared. The arena wasn't just fighting against him. The crowd was. The atmosphere was. The weight of humiliation was. When he finally fell, the audience celebrated like they had won a championship. 3 victories, 3 defeats. The karate section was losing control. Students stood on chairs screaming. People pounded on the railings. The noise became deafening. And then came the 4th fight. The fight nobody would forget. The Kung Fu representative was older than the others, much older. His movements were calm, disciplined, controlled. The kind of composure earned through decades of training. Even walking toward the ring seemed dignified. For a moment, the audience actually quieted down. Some respected his age, others simply wanted to see what would happen. The bell rang. The karate fighter immediately took control. He was younger, stronger, faster. Everyone could see it. But what happened next crossed a line. Halfway through the fight, instead of finishing the older master, the karate fighter began mocking him. Fake kung fu stances, exaggerated bows, ridiculous hand gestures. The crowd exploded. People doubled over, laughing. Beer rained from the stands. Even some karate students looked uncomfortable. The old master never reacted, not once. His face remained calm, but something in his eyes broke. I saw it through my camera lens. A brief flash of sadness, a lifetime of discipline being laughed at by people who didn't understand it.
Then the final strike landed. The old master hit the canvas. The referee waved the fight off. Karate victory. Again. The arena detonated. The noise became almost unbearable. People screamed, whistled, stomped their feet. The building shook. Across the arena, several kung fu students lowered their heads. One covered his face completely. Another stared at the floor, unable to watch. 4 fights, 4 losses. The humiliation was complete. Or so everyone thought. Then Rick Morrison grabbed a microphone, and everything changed. The giant climbed into the center of the ring. Sweat covered his face. His chest rose and fell heavily. But his smile remained. That smile. The same smile predators wear when they know their prey cannot escape. The crowd immediately quieted. Everyone wanted to hear him. Rick slowly turned toward the kung fu section, then laughed. A long, cruel, satisfied laugh. "This," he pointed toward the defeated fighters, "is your legendary kung fu?" The audience exploded. The laughter returned instantly, louder than before. Rick continued, "You people call this martial arts?" More laughter, more cheering, more mockery. Then came the sentence that pushed the entire arena over the edge. "This belongs in a theater." The audience roared. Rick pointed directly at the Chinese masters. "Not a fight." Some people actually stood on their chairs. The humiliation had become a spectacle, a public execution. And Rick wasn't finished, not even close. He slowly paced across the ring, enjoying every second, feeding on the crowd's energy. Then he stopped, looked directly at the kung fu section, and delivered the sentence that would change the entire night. "If anybody from kung fu wants more humiliation." The arena became quiet, waiting, anticipating. Rick's smile widened. "Send your best dancer down here." For a brief moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody breathed. The challenge hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, final.
Thousands of eyes turned toward the Chinese masters. Nothing. No movement. No response. No volunteer. Honestly, I understood why. Rick Morrison looked invincible. His teammates looked unstoppable. 4 victories had proven it. What sane person would walk into that ring now? What sane person would willingly become the next victim? The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15. Then a voice emerged from somewhere inside the crowd. Not loud, not aggressive, just calm. "I'll fight." At first, many people didn't even hear it. The arena remained noisy, confused. Then heads started turning. One section after another. People stood, pointed, whispered, trying to locate the speaker. The laughter slowly faded, not because of fear, because of curiosity. Near the center rows, a man stood up, small, lean, wearing a dark jacket. No entourage, no dramatic entrance, no performance. Just a quiet man standing among thousands. Something about him immediately felt different. The kung fu masters looked confused. Several exchanged nervous glances. One leaned forward, trying to see. The stranger removed his jacket slowly, folded it calmly, then began walking toward the ring. The crowd parted almost instinctively. Nobody knew why. They simply moved, as though some invisible force was clearing a path. Step, step, step. Every footstep seemed louder than the crowd itself. The arena gradually fell silent. People weren't laughing anymore. Something had changed. I felt it too. A strange pressure, a tension I couldn't explain. Then the man stepped beneath the arena lights, and half the building froze. I recognized him instantly. So did several fighters near ringside. So did a few reporters. Whispers spread through the crowd, fast, then faster, like wildfire. "That's Chuck Norris. No way. It can't be. Is that really him?" Even Rick Morrison's smile weakened. Only slightly, but I saw it. For the first time all night, uncertainty flashed across his face. Chuck climbed through the ropes. Calm, relaxed, expressionless. Compared to the karate champions, he looked almost ordinary, smaller, lighter, less intimidating, at least from the outside. But there was something about his eyes, something impossible to ignore. He wasn't angry. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He looked like a man who had already reached a conclusion. Rick laughed, but this time the laughter sounded forced. "You?" A few nervous chuckles came from the audience. "You came to save them?" Chuck ignored him completely. Instead, he looked around the arena, at the crowd, at the defeated fighters, at the kung fu masters, at the thousands of people who had spent the entire night celebrating humiliation. Only then did he look at Rick. And when he finally spoke, his voice was so calm that the entire building seemed to lean forward. "You already won tonight." Silence. Complete silence. Rick smirked. "Damn right." Chuck's eyes never left him. "But you confused victory with superiority." The words hit harder than a punch. The crowd murmured. Rick's smile faded slightly. Chuck continued. "You beat 4 men." His gaze shifted briefly toward the injured fighters.
Then you insulted an entire tradition. The arena felt different now, smaller, tighter, like a storm gathering pressure. Rick stepped closer. So what now? Chuck looked at him for several seconds, and for the first time all night, something dangerous appeared behind his eyes. Then he pointed toward the karate team. The entire arena watched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody blinked. Chuck's voice remained calm. Send your 3 strongest fighters. The arena exploded. People screamed, shouted, laughed. Some thought they had misheard him. Others looked at each other in disbelief. Even the announcer froze. Rick blinked, then laughed. A nervous laugh, an uncertain laugh. Chuck never smiled, never reacted, never looked away.
I'll fight all 3. The arena instantly descended into chaos, and standing there with my camera hanging forgotten around my neck, I suddenly realized something terrifying. Chuck Norris wasn't bluffing. And somehow, deep down, he already knew something nobody else in that building understood.
For several seconds after Chuck Norris issued the challenge, the arena seemed to forget how to breathe. 5,000 people sat frozen. The noise vanished. The excitement vanished. Even the laughter vanished. 3 fighters, at the same time, against 1 man. It sounded insane. Then reality returned. The arena exploded. People jumped to their feet. Reporters rushed toward ringside. Karate students nearly collapsed from laughing. Some pointed at Chuck, others shouted insults. A few screamed for the fight to start immediately. Rick Morrison wiped tears from his eyes. You serious? Chuck didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't move. The giant's laughter slowly faded, because something about Chuck felt wrong. Not weak, not reckless. Wrong. Like a man standing in the middle of a burning building without noticing the flames. Eventually, Rick nodded. Fine. The crowd erupted. The challenge was accepted. And suddenly nobody cared about the tournament anymore. The entire night had become about one thing: Chuck Norris. Minutes later, the rules were announced. No judges, no points, no time limit. Victory by knockout or surrender. The audience roared. This wasn't a match anymore. It was an execution. At least, that's what everyone believed. Backstage, the karate fighters prepared together. Rick wrapped tape around his fists. Tom Bennett cracked his neck repeatedly. Carl Douglas sat quietly in a corner. Unlike the others, he wasn't laughing. Rick noticed. You scared? Carl looked up. No. Then what's your problem? For several seconds, Carl said nothing. Then he answered, Something's off. Rick rolled his eyes. He's one guy. Carl nodded slowly. I know. Then stop thinking about it. But Carl couldn't, because he had seen something. Not in Chuck's body, not in his size, not in his stance. In his eyes. Most men showed fear before a fight, or excitement, or anger. Chuck had shown nothing, absolutely nothing. And that disturbed him more than he wanted to admit.
Above them, the arena continued shaking with anticipation. The crowd wanted blood. They wanted humiliation. They wanted to see the arrogant challenger destroyed. Then the lights dimmed. The noise grew louder, and the 3 karate champions entered together. Rick Morrison, Tom Bennett, Carl Douglas. 3 giants walking side by side beneath thunderous applause. The audience exploded. People screamed themselves hoarse. The confidence inside the building felt overwhelming. Then Chuck Norris appeared. Alone. No music, no celebration, no dramatic entrance. Just quiet footsteps beneath bright white lights. The contrast was unsettling. 3 champions, 1 challenger, thousands against 1. Yet somehow Chuck looked like the calmest person in the building. Beer cups flew toward the ring. Insults followed. "Go home! You're dead! Sit down, cowboy!" Chuck ignored every word, not because he was trying to appear tough, because the noise genuinely seemed irrelevant to him. That made people uncomfortable. The referee gathered all 4 fighters at center ring. The visual looked absurd. 3 massive karate champions surrounding 1 smaller man. The crowd started chanting, "Karate! Karate! Karate!" Rick grinned. "You still got time to leave." Chuck looked directly into his eyes. "You already lost." Rick laughed. "The fight hasn't started." Chuck nodded once. "No." Then his voice dropped. "It started the moment you confused disrespect with strength." Something inside the arena shifted. The laughter weakened, the tension grew. Even the referee looked nervous now. He stepped backward, raised his hand, and signaled for the fight to begin. The bell rang. The arena exploded. Rick charged immediately. Tom attacked from the left. Carl moved wide to cut off escape. 3 trained fighters, 1 target. Thousands of people rose from their seats. Then something happened that I still struggle to describe. Chuck moved. Not fast, not quick, not even explosive. He simply moved. And somehow nobody understood what they were seeing. One moment he stood in front of them, the next moment he wasn't there. Rick's punch sliced through empty air. Tom missed completely. Carl grabbed nothing. A wave of confusion swept through the arena. Then came the sound. Crack! Tom Bennett's head snapped sideways. Nobody saw the punch. Nobody. Not even the cameras. One instant Tom was standing. The next instant he was unconscious. His body crashed onto the canvas. The arena fell silent. Not quieter. Silent. Thousands of people stared in disbelief. Tom didn't move. The referee rushed forward. Medics climbed into the ring. Nobody understood what had happened. Rick stared at Chuck, then at Tom, then back at Chuck. His confidence cracked for the first time. "What was that?" Chuck's answer came calmly. "A punch." The crowd erupted into arguments. Some claimed it was luck, others claimed it was illegal. Most simply looked confused. Because they hadn't seen the strike. They had only seen the result. Tom Bennett was carried from the ring. 1 fighter down. 2 remained. The atmosphere had changed completely. The laughter was gone. Fear had entered the building. Carl felt it too. He never stopped watching Chuck, not for a second. Unlike Rick, Carl understood something important. Chuck wasn't fighting emotionally. He wasn't proving a point. He wasn't angry. He was operating with absolute control. And that made him terrifying. The fight resumed. This time Rick and Carl attacked together. No hesitation, no arrogance, only violence. Rick launched a devastating hook. Carl attacked low. The timing looked perfect. The trap looked perfect. The crowd held its breath. Then Chuck stepped sideways. One tiny movement, one impossible angle. Everything missed. Carl suddenly realized he was exposed. Too late. Thud! Chuck's sidekick slammed into Carl's ribs. The sound echoed through the arena. Carl's body lifted from the floor, actually lifted. The crowd gasped. Carl crashed against the ropes, collapsed to one knee, unable to breathe. Chuck never even looked at him afterward. His attention stayed locked on Rick. That scared me more than the kick, because it looked like Chuck already knew exactly how every second of the fight would unfold. Rick roared, anger replacing confidence. He attacked wildly. Punches, hooks, elbows, everything he had. Chuck slipped through the storm effortlessly. No wasted movement, no panic, no hesitation. Every motion looked efficient, precise, calculated. The audience sat frozen. Even karate students stopped cheering. Rick launched another huge punch. Chuck stepped inside. Crack! A straight punch landed. Blood exploded from Rick's nose. The giant staggered backward. Shock flooded his face. For the first time all night, Rick Morrison looked vulnerable. Chuck moved forward. One step, then another. No rush, no emotion. Like a man walking toward a conclusion. Rick swung again, missed. Chuck struck. Rick stumbled. Chuck struck again. Every impact sounded sharp, precise, merciless. The giant's confidence disappeared completely. And then everyone saw it. Fear. Real fear. The most feared fighter in Los Angeles was afraid. Carl forced himself back to his feet, breathing painfully. He looked at Rick, then at Chuck, and something inside him broke. The crowd sensed it immediately. Because Carl stopped looking at Chuck like an opponent, he started looking at him like a force of nature. Rick gathered himself for one final attack, one last desperate charge. The entire arena rose to its feet. This was it. Everything depended on this moment. Rick screamed and lunged forward. Chuck moved first. One step, one strike. Boom! The punch landed clean. Rick Morrison froze. His eyes lost focus. His body remained standing for half a second. Then the giant collapsed backward. The canvas shook. The arena exploded. Some people screamed. Others grabbed their heads. Many simply stared, unable to process what they had witnessed. The unbeatable champion was unconscious. The monster had fallen. And now only one fighter remained, Carl Douglas. The former soldier stood alone, breathing heavily, looking at his fallen teammates, then at Chuck. The building became silent again. Chuck spoke first. "You can stop." Carl didn't answer. The karate students screamed from outside the ring. "Get him! Fight! Don't quit!" Carl ignored them. He kept staring at Chuck. And what he saw there changed everything. Chuck wasn't tired. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't even breathing hard. If anything, he looked calmer than before. Carl finally understood the truth. This wasn't luck. This wasn't momentum. This wasn't a miracle. They had simply underestimated the wrong man. Slowly, Carl lowered his fists. The audience erupted. Boos, shouts, protests. Carl ignored them all. His voice came out rough.
I'm done. The entire arena froze. Even the referee looked shocked. Carl stepped forward, then bowed, not sarcastically, not mockingly. A real bow. A bow built on respect. The building fell completely silent, because everybody understood what it meant. The fight was over. Chuck returned the bow. Then the referee officially stopped the contest. 3 champions defeated, 1 man standing. History rewritten. A microphone appeared near ringside. Someone handed it to Chuck. He looked across the arena, at the defeated fighters, at the stunned crowd, at the kung fu masters whose eyes now glistened with emotion. Then he spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Martial arts were never meant to create hatred. Nobody moved. Styles don't make a man superior. The silence deepened. Respect does. The words settled over the arena like a weight. Nobody laughed. Nobody shouted. Nobody mocked. Because suddenly, everyone understood. The lesson had never been about karate, or kung fu, or who was stronger. It was about arrogance, and what happens when arrogance mistakes itself for truth.
Rick Morrison eventually regained consciousness. Blood covered his face. His pride hurt far more than his injuries. Chuck walked toward him. The entire arena watched. Rick looked up. For a moment, nobody knew what would happen. Then Rick lowered his head. I was wrong. The words were barely audible, but the arena heard them. Chuck extended his hand. After several seconds, Rick took it. And something remarkable happened. The crowd stood. Not to celebrate violence, not to celebrate defeat, but to acknowledge what they had witnessed. Respect. Real respect. The kind that cannot be demanded, only earned. Years later, people would argue about that night. Some would claim the story was exaggerated. Others would swear it happened exactly that way. Some would debate how fast Chuck Norris moved. Others would debate whether any man could really dominate 3 champions. But none of those arguments matter. Because I was there. I heard the laughter at the beginning. I heard the silence at the end. And in all my years around fighters, I never saw a crowd change faster than it did that night. 5,000 people entered that arena convinced they knew who the strongest man was. They left with a very different understanding. Because strength isn't always loud. It isn't always big, and it certainly isn't always the man everyone expects. Sometimes, it's the quiet man nobody bothered to understand. And somehow nobody understood what they were seeing. One moment, he stood in front of them. The next moment, he wasn't there. Rick's punch sliced through empty air. Tom missed completely. Carl grabbed nothing. A wave of confusion swept through the arena. Then came the sound. Crack! Tom Bennett's head snapped sideways. Nobody saw the punch. Nobody. Not even the cameras. One instant, Tom was standing. The next instant, he was unconscious. His body crashed onto the canvas. The arena fell silent. Not quieter. Silent. Thousands of people stared in disbelief. Tom didn't move. The referee rushed forward. Medics climbed into the ring. Nobody understood what had happened. Rick stared at Chuck, then at Tom,
then back at Chuck. His confidence cracked for the first time. What was that? Chuck's answer came calmly. A punch. The crowd erupted into arguments. Some claimed it was luck. Others claimed it was illegal. Most simply looked confused because they hadn't seen the strike. They had only seen the result. Tom Bennett was carried from the ring. One fighter down, 2 remained. The atmosphere had changed completely. The laughter was gone. Fear had entered the building. Carl felt it too. He never stopped watching Chuck, not for a second. Unlike Rick, Carl understood something important. Chuck wasn't fighting emotionally. He wasn't proving a point. He wasn't angry. He was operating with absolute control. And that made him terrifying. The fight resumed. This time Rick and Carl attacked together. No hesitation, no arrogance, only violence. Rick launched a devastating hook. Carl attacked low. The timing looked perfect. The trap looked perfect. The crowd held its breath. Then Chuck stepped sideways. One tiny movement, one impossible angle. Everything missed. Carl suddenly realized he was exposed. Too late. Thud! Chuck's sidekick slammed into Carl's ribs. The sound echoed through the arena. Carl's body lifted from the floor, actually lifted. The crowd gasped.